We are now.
We're good? Okay, Here we go. All right, thank you, Your Worship, members of council and members of the public that are watching in this evening. As mentioned, this is a statutory public meeting under the Planning Act. It's related to the removal of a holding symbol for 52 MacArthur Drive. I'll be pretty brief in this in the overview of this application. The purpose of the holding symbol, MacArthur Drive, is a long-standing residential subdivision where lots are smaller than the minimum lot size requirements of the zoning bylaw. As a result, the lots are zoned for residential development, but they do have a holding symbol on them. And what a holding symbol is, it's a tool that's enabled through the Planning Act that the municipality can require that certain items are demonstrated before development can proceed or before a building permit can be issued. And in this case, the necessary step is that it needs to be demonstrated that a septic system can adequately be sited on the lot based on the lot size. In support of this application, a report was, or a letter was provided by a local septic installer that it's done a site inspection that indicates that the lot is suitable to have a septic system on the site. And as a result, that's the necessary criteria that needed to be met for removal of the hold. So it's staff's recommendation that council does pass a bylaw this evening to remove the holding symbol from the property. So that's the basis for this application tonight. It's fairly straightforward. So that's it, Your Worship, from my end.
Good, Jamie. Sarah, do we have any member of the public that would? No. Okay. Members of council, are there any members of council that have questions through to Jamie? Being none, then there are no questions from council. The information presented, then we thank everyone for your attendance and participation, and we will move on.
Thank you, Worship.
So our next presentation actually is a pleasant deputation. It's a presentation. It's the presentation of checks presentations to 4 recipients, and we start off with a presentation to the physician recruitment. So the Southern Georgian Bay family physician recruitment was approved $8,500 in funding through the financial contributions to community organizations. The policy. The funding will support multifaceted recruitment strategies, marketing activities, and learner support while in the community. Congratulations to our first recipient, and accepting the check is Shannon Lauren and Dr. Jeff Galiski.
Hello, good evening, everyone. Thank you for having us tonight. And on behalf of our local physician recruitment program, I'd like to thank the town of Penetanguishene for your continued support. As you're probably aware, with other similar communities across the province, physician recruitment continues to be quite a challenge, especially in family medicine. But I think with our commitment from our local municipalities and the commitment from Georgian Bay General Hospital, our program will continue to provide physicians to our community and work to retain them as well. So thank you, everyone, for your continued support.
Very good. It actually is a pleasure to be supporting physician recruitment. We know the need is there at all times. So thank you and good luck.
Thank you.
Our second, the Georgian Bay Cancer Support Center is the second recipient of the financial contributions to community organizations policy with approved funding of $10,000. This funding is going towards phase 1 of the Garden of Hope, which will provide an inclusive, vibrant, comforting, safe space for people living with cancer, their caregivers, and the public. Continue the great work. And accepting on behalf of the Cancer Support Center is Eric Walter, Executive Director. Eric?
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me. Good to see you. Yeah, as you know, the Georgian Bay Cancer Support Center is obviously a very important place in the community. Thank you to the town of Penetanguishene for the continued support. We've seen record membership growth over this past 6 to 12 months, which is unfortunate, but also it's reassuring that the word is out and people feel comfortable coming to us as a resource in the community. And this is really lets us become a true part of the community and bring the community into our space and provide a bit of a bridge for what we do inside the center, and welcome everybody to that space. So thank you everybody for your support. And this is beyond words what it means to our community. So thank you.
Yes, and on behalf of Council, Eric, we thank you for all the great work that the Cancer Support Center does in our community. And we certainly enjoy driving up Edward Street and seeing that beautiful building that Cancer Support Center people have worked so hard to put out there. And good luck.
Thank you.
The third recipient is Cultural Alliance in the heart of Georgian Bay with funding in the amount of $10,000. The funding will assist us in celebrating, fostering, promoting, and leveraging cultural resources in the heart of Georgian Bay. We're excited to see what activities, events, and initiatives are to come. And on behalf of Councillor Cindy Hastings and Chair Cunningham, recipients.
Hi, good evening, Your Worship and Council. Thank you very much for your confidence in us and support for this unique collaboration between the 5 communities. And we have some very dedicated committee members, including your very own and very awesome Nicole Jackson. And they continue to work very hard to create initiatives that enhance and promote culture in our area. So thank you very much again.
Thank you. And then we are certainly looking forward to the great events that are forthcoming, Cindy. Thank you. And our fourth recipient is the Georgian Bay General Hospital Foundation. Accepting check will be Nicole Krasczyk, Christine Bailey, and Gail Hunt. The Georgian Bay General Hospital Foundation is our final recipient of $10,000 in funds to support the hospital in the purchase of essential equipment. We're grateful to have such a great hospital close by providing critical patient care. Congrats to the Hospital Foundation.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. It's Gail Hunt here. In the efforts of expediency, I'll speak tonight. So big thanks to the Township of Penetanguishene. I think you're well over $200,000 that you've donated over time to the hospital. This time it was to our impact fund, which allows us some flexibility. As you know, we do have a planned capital list every year, but hospital as it is, sometimes unplanned things break down. So this gives us the flexibility to prioritize equipment. Some of the things that your donation went towards this last year was definitely the 11 crash carts and defibrillators that you might have seen on our social media that we announced, which are very important to the organization, as well as blood gas analyzers and stretchers for infants. So once again, thank you for the support to the hospital. We really appreciate it. Your community and residents appreciate it. It touches all of us. So thank you for your ongoing support. And we look forward to continuing to work together. Thank you.
Thank you, Gail. And I must say, we are very fortunate to have such a great hospital in our area. I have to add, though, that we're going to be very sorry to see you leaving our hospital. But on the same token, it's my opportunity to congratulate you on your move to RDH. Great, and it's great to see. And if there's anyone more deserving, it's Gail Hunt. So thank you and good luck.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
So with that concludes our presentations, and we move on to B, the presentation from the Penetanguishene Public Library, CAO Linda Keenan and Board Chair Christine Patnode. Annual report.
Good evening, Your Worship, members of the council, staff, and public. I'm actually going to take this off so you can hear me better.
Yeah.
So I am Linda Keenan, the CEO of the Penetanguishene Public Library, and I'm with my chair, Christine Patnode. And tonight we're going to give you just a little bit about what's old, new, and all about our library. So I believe I'm going to be sharing my screen. or do you have the presentations in front of you? Just want to make sure.
Linda, if you could please share your screen.
All right. All right, so welcome to the Penetanguishene Public Library, where we are truly the hub of our community, where one and all belong to the community through our library. The fact, and it's okay, so it's changing, sorry about that. The fact that we are the one of the 69 remaining Carnegie libraries, to which 125 were built, is worth a mention in itself. Our library was built in 1910, followed by an addition in 1995. Talk about your strong roots to the ground. Back to the present now, we are currently looking to develop the lower level by installing our much needed up to code stairway. Our plans also include a larger meeting room with capability to be divided into 2 meeting rooms. The larger room sporting a wonderful health inspected kitchen, a much needed programming room, proper facilities. This newly developed space will permit greater revenue for the library, programming space that is long overdue, and a space that is accessible to all, providing a place to our community like no other. Imagine the possibilities, the services, programs, and events you could access with one simple library card on a daily basis. The library is so much more than just a place of books. We are providers of cultural awareness, educational programs, and events. We engage our community and still support freedom of expression and so much more. I personally remember as a child getting my first library card and going in to get books, seeing that friendly librarian, the feel and smell of the books. Of course, some things have changed since the millennium, but the friendliness, professionalism of our staff has not. We are truly thankful for the financial support from the town, to which 75% of our overall yearly budget, as well as the support from many of the town departments to aid us in the day-to-day functions of the library, such as public works, admin, finance, bylaw, fire, parks, and rec. The many partnerships formed with local organizations and businesses help us financially, socially, and to provide certain relevant services, programs, and events, such as health and wellness, computer skills, parenting, and of course, art. Rapid test kits, advertising, COVID-19 clinics, books, e-resources, park passes, and presentations, to name a few. We found when working with partners, forming new alliances and new contracts, we were able to offer so much more to our community and our patrons. In fact, it enabled our library to provide a safe environment for services, events, workshops for all to attend, to remain open during COVID-19 beginning stages while keeping staff and members safe at work. Our strategic plan from 2016 to 2021 said it all. A visit will get you thinking. Oh, and the possibilities. As we commence to work on our 2022 to 2027 plan, our goals are greater. 1 card, 1 million possibilities. To think what we will get. Throughout the closures of 2021 and 2020 caused by the pandemic, the library didn't skip a beat in providing services to the community and its patrons. Our statistics show that we were able to have in-person visits safely, that we kept up with our programs as takeaway bags or online, and our circulation was great. We saw our numbers increase for materials by 5.51%, our e-resources by 37.54%, children's program phenomenally by 344%, and of course our adult programs by 132%. We did see some substantial decreases in our numbers in 2020. However, we see that things are on the mend from the many shutdowns and restrictions with our numbers in 2021 and 2022. We are now trying to find a way to cope with the influx of services and programs, both in person and online, with the minimal staff that we currently have. This leaves us with having to keep restrictions and capacity limits for programs for now. It's even harder with the pandemic symptoms and more shortages of staff. I truly applaud my overworked staff for all the hard work and keeping us open, active during this pandemic. We are also very thankful for the support, funding, and volunteer we receive from the Friends of the Penetanguishene Public Library, with their fundraising partners, Delta Vegas Style Machines and Bingo Hall, of course, as well as all our partners in the community. They have been great to us during the pandemic in adapting with all the restrictions and providing us with great programs. And of course, our board's guidance throughout this pandemic has enabled us to reopen safely, provide the services and programs ahead of our libraries, and let us serve as mentors to others. For that, we are thankful for their support and guidance. To you, your worship, members of the council, and your staff, we sincerely thank you for your ongoing support. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Linda. Very well done. Good report. Well prepared and very interesting. Members of council, do we have any questions to Linda? No, just thank you and keep up the good work for the people of Penetanguishene. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to adoption of minutes not already confirmed. And that is that the following minutes of council meetings be confirmed and adopted as circulated. Council March 9, 2022. Mover and a seconder, Deputy Mayor and Councillor Cummings, all in favor. And that is carried. Thank you. Consent agenda, we have none. Matters for consideration is a verbal update from the Chief Administrative Officer re COVID-19 municipal impacts. And that the verbal update from the Chief Administrative Officer be received for information. Mr. CAO.
Thank you, Your Worship. What I'd like to provide for members of council and the public is our monthly update with respect to COVID. The last update I provided was on March the 9th, and since then, a number of things have happened provincially, and I just want to walk through that in a very brief manner. On March the 21st, the province announced changes to the public health and workplace safety measures, majority of which essentially lifted the general masking requirements with the exception of a number of indoor settings, predominantly around public transportation, healthcare, some home and community care providers, long-term care, and shelters. At the same time, the province also removed the need for passive screening prior to entering a business, as well as businesses and organizations that are open no longer required safety plans or to make them available. A little while later, and this is coming up very shortly in a couple of weeks, but as of April 27th, all remaining measures, directives, and orders will end. So the removal of those masking requirements in all the remaining settings, as well as any other remaining emergency orders under the Reopening Ontario Act, will also expire. April 6th, which was the beginning of last week, in consultation with the Chief Medical Officer, the provincial government expanded eligibility for fourth doses for a number of folks, those 60 and over, as well as the First Nation, Inuit, and Métis individuals, and any of their non-Indigenous household members aged 18 and over, starting the following day on the 7th. Earlier this week, everyone probably heard the province did also make an announcement with respect to antiviral treatments in Ontario, and essentially expanding that eligibility as well as PCR testing to the more high-risk individuals. From a public health perspective, The end of March, on the 31st, the Chief Medical Officer of Health announced guidance around continuing workplace COVID-19 vaccination policies and provided some support and guidance to the general population with respect to what that might look like. Further, the Public Health Unit also announced several pop-up and walk-in vaccination clinics that were going to be made available the week of April 11th, so earlier this week, right through to the 17th. With respect to the town and municipal impacts, a number of things I'd like to share. The museum is open to the public at full capacity. We do not require proof of vaccination, and face masks are no longer required. The research room is by appointment only, so that would require a booking. With respect to the ice at the arena, it's been a long old winter for our Parks and Rec staff in a number of respects, but the ice did come out officially 2 Mondays ago on the 4th of April. With respect to our administrative facilities, they do continue to be open to the public from 8:30 to 4:30, and there is no longer a lunch shut-in. With respect to the Penetanguishene Public Library, who we just heard from, a number of exciting things happening at that facility. Their hours do remain what they've been for some time. They do have meetings and program space that are open to the public. Their space is limited, I should say, and they continue to offer a number of virtual offerings as well. The masks are no longer required at the library, but they do. There is a requirement that staff continue to wear masks on Thursdays, where masks must be worn at all times for the immunocompromised patrons. Here we are at Council and Committee, and we're attempting to be back in person, unfortunately with a few little hiccups, but these things happen, and I think our staff have done an excellent job at adjusting on the fly, despite the tummy acid that I'm sure some of them did receive. Well done to Stacey and Sarah. With respect to our control group, the control group continues to meet now on a monthly basis. We just met yesterday, and we've removed the need for the active screening amongst our staff, but we are maintaining our vaccination policy for the time being. We're going to revisit that at our meeting on May the 10th. We're also hoping to incorporate the guidance that public health has provided in that respect. Mr. Mayor, that's really everything I wanted to provide. I won't go through the statistics because I think we hear statistics, all of us hear statistics regularly, but certainly if there's any questions or comments, I'd be happy to take them.
Thank you, Mr. CAO. Members of council, do we have any questions through to the CAO? Jessica, did I see your hand up? No? Nope. Okay, no one. Okay, then with that, thank you, Mr. CAO. And we will now move on to B, the zoning bylaw amendment, the removal of the holding H symbol for 52 MacArthur Drive.
Sorry, Your Worship, we do have a motion for that item.
We want a motion for that. Okay, so a mover and a seconder. Councillor Mayette and Councillor Sainama, all in favor? Thank you. And the zoning bylaw amendment, removal of the holding H symbol for 52 MacArthur Drive, that the proposed zoning bylaw amendment to remove the holding H symbol for property municipally known as 52 MacArthur Drive be approved. Mover and a seconder. Councillor Sainama, Deputy Mayor. And do we have any further questions on this? I think it was well explained. So all in favor? And that is carried. Thank you. Moving on to C, Curling Club financial request for capital repairs, RCS 2022-07. Whereas the Penetanguishene Curling Club has expressed an openness to consider participating in a new multi-use recreation center, and whereas the Penetanguishene Curling Club has requested $49,500 from the town of Penetanguishene for capital repairs to the existing curling facility, that $5,000 from the 2022 capital plan be provided to the Penetanguishene Curling Club, and that a loan of $44,500 be offered to the club in keeping with the terms outlined under option A of the staff report. And finally, that the clerk bring forward the necessary bylaw for council approval of a loan. So I would ask for a mover and a seconder to put it on the floor. Councillor Mayette and Councillor Saint-Amand. All in favor? Oh, yeah, discussion. Okay. And who we have? Councillor Cummings.
Thank you, Your Worship. It's hard speaking from this penalty box here, but I'll see what I can do. As much as I appreciate the staff report that we saw regarding the curling club, I feel that personally, I think there's a few discrepancies here, and I think we need to hear the other side of the story as well. I've been a member of the curling club off and on for since 1989. When we formally, as a town, when we formally got together this lease, I believe, Your Worship, you were one of the first councillors that sat on the Penetang Curling Club board after that lease was formed. We look at the town taking care of the building. Well, the building is considered to have windows and doors and washrooms as a building, not as a curling club, as a building. And we promised at that time during the lease that we would take care of those things. Just a highlight, as I said, I've been a member since 1989, off and on. I am also a level 3 certified ice technician. Very few in Ontario hold that. So I understand what equipment is needed and how crucial it is to make curling ice. Not so much for hockey ice, but for curling ice, it's very specific. So in the last 20 years, just to bring you up to date, our tenant, and as I said, I read this report and I felt like it was a landlord-tenant disagreement. And the landlord was distancing itself from the tenant. In the past 20 years, the curling club has installed new windows, installed 2 new fire doors, double doors, had to replace a garage door, which was dilapidated. There were upgrades made to the washrooms. There was a new addition added on to the building because the existing washroom facility plus the offices were falling apart. The retaining wall that was put there was to add space to the municipal parking lot, plus it was to fix the eroding wall away from curling club walls. And as far as the town's contribution to those building aspects, nothing has been given to the curling club until 2 years ago. And at that time, there was a request in for $10,000 to help with a piece of equipment. And the drainage that the curling club spent thousands of dollars without going through insurance, first of all, to try and rectify it themselves, not knowing that the problem was actually outside. So the curling club, our tenants, have responded faithfully and tried to keep the town's expenses low in the curling club. And I think, in my opinion, we should be looking at giving that grant to them as part of our community development fund or any reserve fund that we have to help them at this one time. It's really important that the machinery that they get, as in the arena where the dehumidifier is absolutely crucial when starting up ice. The heaters are actually crucial starting up ice, but they are also crucial when you are curling on the ice to keep ambient temperatures proper. So my request, or my request would be that we grant the $49,000 as requested, since we need to catch up with some of these things on the capital. Thank you.
Maybe I think you have your request to speak.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Oops.
You're okay, try now.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay. Famous words of the pandemic. Can you hear me? I'm very grateful to Councillor Cummings for recounting a bit of recent history. on the curling club. I also wanted, the only thing I wanted to add to that is that in order to keep themselves afloat during COVID, the curling club also had to take out the $40,000 provincial COVID, wasn't provincial, sorry, federal COVID fund, which is repayable by them. I believe it's been extended now to December 2023. So just nod, Brian, if I've got that right, 2023? Yeah, okay. So having them on a payback system for a loan we might give them, regardless of it being a non-interest loan, will add to the $40,000 they have to pay back, which is not realistic. And we also have to, along with the financial burden to the membership, we also have to keep in mind that we have to decide if curling is part of small town Ontario culture, history, and something we value. So I would agree with Councillor Cummings that we actually bite the bullet on this and assist the curling club at this difficult time during a couple of years of difficult times. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Levy. Anyone else have any comments or concerns? Councillor LaRose?
Just one, Your Worship. When you look at the whole it's confusing whether you're live or not live. I appreciate everything that's been said so far. I look at it a little more simplistic view. A curling club that can't make ice is no longer a curling club. So if we look at that building and if the ice plant isn't working, if they cannot produce ice, it's just a big square box sitting down there doing nothing. So I believe that it would be, if it was my preference, I would grant them this money. We can send it back to staff to see if there's some acceptable reserves to hit or some leftover capital money to fit. I think that staff could take a look at that, but I would be in favor of granting them the money at this time.
Thank you. Further, Councillor Badabakar?
Thank you, Worship. I have similar sentiments to my colleagues who have already spoken. In fact, at the March 9th meeting, when this first came up, we had a report on our committee of the whole agenda that dealt with the distribution of the Municipal Modernization Fund in the Treasurer's report, and it indicated that part of the purpose of that fund that was created or delivered to the municipality by the province was for capital investments. And we had, or the Treasurer had itemized a number of capital investments, and it indicated that 199,000, almost 200,000 was going to be transferred to reserve for future capital projects. So that was good news. And for me, that was kind of a potential source of revenue for this ask. And you remember at that time, the ask was much more substantial. And I want to congratulate the curling club on being able or being successful in getting that grant, which reduced the request to 49,000 from the original 150. That was really good news. So I think there is money available, to Councillor Rose's point. However, the Treasurer feels the best in terms of supporting this initiative. I think that there's money there, and that was my concern. In reading the report, and I know Councillor Cummings has alluded to this, it was interesting because we have two reports back to back. We have the curling club, which is in need of about $49,000 to replace a couple of key pieces of equipment. And the next item is the arena, which is to replace a roof. And it's a substantial cost, and it's a pretty critical piece to the operation of the arena. And part of the logic in the report dealing with the arena is that the facility must remain available for safe use for a number of years until a new center is realized. And I think that that point is exactly the point that goes to the curling club, because you remember when the study was presented, there were some options about having the curling club as part of this new arena, because they were both in a similar state and both would have to be replaced. So from a logic standpoint, I look at it and say, okay, if we're going to spend this money on the arena to make it available for safe use for a number of years until a new center is realized, I think we can apply that to the curling club, that same logic. And when I was looking at the curling club report, in the report that was given to us, there was a copy of the agreement that the town had entered into with the curling club, and it outlined the town's responsibilities and the curling club's responsibilities, and it's a good document. It's referred to in the report. But one of the things that's not referred to in the report is paragraph 53. It's on page 58 in your agenda. And it says that the town will consider on an annual basis cost sharing with the curling club for capital repairs, upgrades, or improvements to the premises as part of the capital budget process as funds permit. So it's a partnership. So we work with the curling club in terms of addressing capital repairs. So tonight I came to the meeting thinking that that I would look to council to support entering into a partnership with splitting the loan on a 50-50 basis, taking the say 50,000 for argument's sake and saying the town would pay 25,000 capital repair and the curling club would be responsible for 25,000 through a loan to be paid back after its current loan is paid. And I thought, okay, that seems to be a reasonable approach, but I'm encouraged by my colleagues on council who are now saying we have an issue here. We need to address this issue. The curling club has done its part. It's now the town to step up and do its part. So I'll be prepared to support if there's a motion put forward by one of my colleagues to support that we pay the cost of the capital upgrade. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Woodbury. And before I would entertain any kind of motion, I would like to hear any other further comments from members of council. Are there any other members of council who wish to comment? Councillor Sinema?
Thank you, Your Worship. I certainly appreciate all of the comments and the issues that are have been brought forward. I agree it is something that is needed. Curling is certainly a part of our community. My concern from granting all of the money to the curling club is the size of the request for the number of people that it is from the membership perspective. I would be more inclined to go with the 50-50 split. From a capital perspective, according to the report that we've received, there has been requests going along that have asked for input as to whether there is work that needs to be done so that we could budget accordingly. And we've been doing the $5,000 a year to have set aside for those instances. But I'm not prepared to support the full 100%, but I would be willing to go with the 50-50.
Okay, further comments from the members of council? Deputy Mayor.
Unmute. There, how's that? Very good. Oh, sorry. Oh, dear. No, I can unmute, but I can't on camera. So anyway, I will speak.
Yeah.
Thank you to my fellow councillors for their comments this evening. I came here this evening, as Councillor Santama has just pointed out, I came here this evening with a no. But in hearing comments made and the suggestion that perhaps a 50-50 split seems a little more palatable to me. So I would support that if that motion comes forward. I know that the curling club is certainly an integral part of our community. My family, the Santama family, certainly are founders of our community curling club and certainly understand the importance of having that in our community. But I also look at the numbers of actual Penetanguishene residents who are participating in the curling club, and perhaps it's what, 60% of their membership, which is not bad. And hopefully that will increase over the next year or so. But it's a very different facility than trying to compare the curling club with the arena. The arena services a lot more people and is available not only for hockey, but it's used for many other things. So I will, as I said, I can't support the full loan of $45,000. But I could certainly entertain a split. So thank you.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Councillor Mayette.
Thank you, Your Worship. This one here is a little bit hard to figure, like the 50-50. I'm sort of in favor for it. The whole loan, I'm not sure. I just don't want to put a precedent out there that they're saying, hey, town just gave $50,000 to the curling club. And I agree with Councillor Valamont-Cali. We are in a partnership with them. They need a lot of repairs. At this time right now, I'm sort of on the 50-50 mark. You know, loan them 25, give them 25. The 50, I'm scared that we're putting presidents out there for, or their organization coming and saying, hey, we can get money from the town because of the COVID or whatever excuse they want to use. So I'm sort of in favor of the 50-50.
Hello, are you hearing me?
I think you were muting when you were speaking. Okay, thank you, Your Worship. I really appreciate Councillor Cummings' information about the investments that have been put in by the club over the years. I think that's helpful information, and I'd love to see that in a spreadsheet format so we can understand the full picture. What I would really like to see is, given the number of things in the agreement that have been, I guess, left unsaid by the volunteers at the curling club, I would like to see an arrangement where perhaps this money is provided on a loan that we could look to in a forgivable format down the road when we can see that the aspects of the agreement are fulfilled on an annual basis. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clue. And I believe that we probably have heard from everyone except the mayor. And with that, I probably, well, you know, curling club, yes, I know it's been in existence here for quite a long time, and it's even though there's a small number of curlers, it's still a very active little place. And it goes back, as the mayor, deputy mayor has alluded to way back to the 50s when the Santamas were very, and I have to take credit myself for part of the curling club, because when I had my hiatus from council, I was the contractor who built the addition. And so I do feel, but at the same time, I was also a part of the negotiations that took place between the curling club and the municipality, and did the contractual agreement and whatnot. And it was clear in it that the curling club would be responsible for the interior of the building and the municipality to the exterior. My fear is not wanting to set a precedent. And so I see the inclination of the members of council, and I therefore would probably entertain the 50-50 split. Not the entire grant. I would go for the 50-50. And so with that, if there is a member of council who would put forward, yes, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a reminder that the motion has been read, moved, and seconded. So seeing that it doesn't sound as appear that that's what's happening, it does need to be dealt with, and then you can request additional thoughts.
So would this motion have to be defeated and then come with a new one?
I believe so, just based on what it is. It doesn't sound like it's a friendly amendment to what we're looking at.
Okay.
But
So,
it might be something.
Okay, so then I call the vote on the motion that is put forward, and call for all in favor. And I don't know if I see any, and then opposed. So all opposed. So then if I could have perhaps one of the members that was willing to do 50-50, Councillor Sandma. Yes, Councillor Cummings.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm putting a motion forward that we grant the curling club the full amount.
The modernization fund.
Okay.
Okay, so you have a motion put forward by Councillor Cummings, seconded by Councillor Rose, that we
grant the full amount. So then we asked all in favor. 1, 2, 3, 4. 5. And so therefore it carries.
Yes.
You had 5? Well, I can call it again. Who's in favor? Who is in favor? Who is in favor? Councillor Mayat, Councillor Cummings, Councillor Ledford, and we have Councillor Levy up there. That's 5. That's 5. So be it. All right, we will move on then to D, Arena Roofing RFP results, that the Arena Roofing request for proposals be awarded to DJ Pete Roofing and Sheet Metal Limited in the amount of $300,566, and that the Chief Administrative Officer is hereby authorized to extend the scope of the project and associated financial spending as outlined in the staff report, and further that any unused funds budgeted for by the town not already in the Arena Reserve be transferred to the Arena Reserve. And I might make one comment there, is that the difference between it and what we just dealt with is that this is a grant. It's not a loan, and it's not taxpayers' dollars. It's a grant. So a mover and a seconder. Councillor Cummings, Councillor Rose, debate, questions, all in favor. And that is carried. Thank you.
No comment from our director of
she's happy with the outcome of this one. Committee of the Whole report. Presentation considered report Committee of the Whole, and that the recommended may contain within the Committee of the Whole report related to the Recreation and Community Services section be approved. Mover, seconder, Deputy Mayor, and Councillor Cummings. And all in favor? Okay. Recommendations contained within committee of the whole report related to the planning and development services section be approved. Mover, Councillor Maybe, seconder, Councillor Wedebacher. And all in favor? The recommendation contained within committee of the whole report related to the transportation and environment services section be approved. Councillor LaRose and Councillor Cummings, all in favor. Recommendation contained within the committee report related to the finance and corporate services section be approved.
My apologies. I would move it, but if we do have to have an amendment to that, to the thank you. Yes, and it under yes. Okay. So the amendment is under from the previous report, item number B3, and it's the updated contract salary grid, report HR 2022-02, and that the council approves the amendment to the contract salary grid as presented within Schedule B of the salary administration policy, with the exception of moving the gardening assistant from level B1 to C1. It's just a small change. So if I don't know, can I move that and then get a seconder? Or okay. Thank you. Yes.
I'm having a problem because sometimes the host unmutes me. Okay, so a mover and a seconder we have, all in favor, and that is carried. And then that, do I have to have, Madam Clerk? Do I have to have again the mover and the seconder for the actual? Yeah. So, okay, so that the recommendations contained within committee of the whole report related to finance and corporate services section be approved. Move Councillor Sinema and seconded Councillor Moyat. All in favor. And that is carried. Thank you. Now we move to motions of which notice has been previously given, and the notices of motion, the motion to reconsider Bill 124, Deputy Mayor A. Dubo, originally considered March 9, 2022, that the Town of Penetanguishene Council call on the Ontario government to immediately repeal Bill 124 and complementary amendments to other legislation made under Bill 124 as a necessary first step to ending the nursing shortage that is compromising the ability of our health system and specifically our local hospitals to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic and care for those who are contracted COVID-19 and its variants. That provincial health systems be requested to review the pay levels applied for permanent nurses in relation to those employed on a temporary basis, and that a copy of the resolution be sent to the Association Municipalities of Ontario, AMO, requesting that they share with all of their member municipalities and the North Simcoe MPPs requesting their support. Madam Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Your Worship. I chaired the meeting when this was brought forward last month, and I didn't vote that particular item, and I was disappointed with my result that I did not vote, and that is why I've asked for it to come forward as a notice of motion, because I would like us to vote on this again, and I will support. The vote was very close. If I had voted, it would have moved forward. So that's why it's here again this evening. So I'm hoping that my fellow councillors will support this motion.
Okay, thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. And with that, Madam Clerk, for us to deal with that this evening, the requirement is.
Thank you, Your Worship. Firstly, we need a seconder to Deputy Mayor Dubo's notice of motion, which Councillor Sanama is looking to.
Okay, and we have Councillor Sanama.
And now that we have have that, our normal procedure would be to, as we all know, wait till the next meeting to have this discussion and vote. If council wishes to discuss and vote on this item today, here and now, we need a motion to waive the rules. That's our procedural rules. And to do that, it is required of a 2/3 of a vote of council this evening.
Therefore, a 2/3 of council would be 6.
6 votes would allow council to
pass it
discuss it and vote on it this evening.
Okay.
In waiving the rule.
You wish to do that?
Yes, I would support that.
Councillor Vadewalker.
Thank you, Worship. Just a question to the clerk. Madam Clerk, is this a 2-step process where the first action is to actually vote on whether we want to reconsider? That's the first step. And if we do that, say it passes, then the next step is the actual motion is considered?
Yes, exactly.
Thank you.
I am muted again. Okay, so then we have to call the vote, and that requires a member of 6. So those in favor.
Sorry, Your Worship, could you call for the vote on the motion to reconsider itself? Yes, okay, thank you.
Yeah, and which requires 6. So those in favor. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it carries. Now you go to a motion to
waive the rules. Whoever's moving that and seconding that.
Deputy Mayor.
I move that we actually support the motion, which of Bill 124.
And Councillor Cummings.
Sorry, Your Worship. I'm voting to waive the rules so that we can deal with this evening. So I'm making a motion for that.
Okay. And
no, you're waiving the rules of procedure tonight.
I'll just get us back on track. So we just need right now, Deputy Mayor, are you moving to waive the rules so this discussion can happen?
Yes.
And who is seconding this move? And
okay.
And now
now we ask the question. All in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yes, yes, and yes. Okay, it carries.
Now the item can be discussed and voted upon.
Do we have any discussion? Councillor LaRose.
Thank you, Your Worship. It's the same thing I said last month. It's whether I agree with it or don't agree with it has nothing to do with it. I don't think it is our job to deal with somebody else's human resource issues. I think we would be absolutely horrified if somebody came to us and did it. So I would not like to do that to their employer.
Okay, thank you, Councillor LaRose. Further questions, concerns, or comments? Councillor, what about that?
Thank you. At the last meeting, I echoed a lot of what Councillor LaRose indicated. My wife is a retired nurse. My sister is a nurse. I fully respect the nursing profession and those that are associated with the nursing profession. I don't agree with Bill 124. I think it's unfair. I think it's punitive. A lot of reasons why I do not support Bill 124. But fundamentally for me, is this something that falls within the municipal mandate? And I think it's outside of our mandate. And I didn't support it then, and I will not be supporting it tonight. Thank you.
Further questions, concerns? Councillor Cummings.
Thank you, Your Worship. Ditto my other councillors there. I did not vote for this last time because I believe it's outside of our lane. However, I do disagree with it for sure, but it is outside of the municipal mandate.
Councillor Sinema and Councillor Fu, I can see you.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I am unmuted. The reason this was brought forward in the first place is as a municipality, it is still our concern as to what is happening with many of our constituents and our workers and the things that are happening in the area. And although it may not be our jurisdiction, I believe it is our fundamental duty to support and to make sure that our message is out there as well, and that we do support our nurses, and that we are and the others that are affected by Bill 124, and having the ability to negotiate in a free and open manner. So I am obviously in support of this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Clue.
Thank you, Your Worship. I supported it last time and I will support it again tonight. This may not be our jurisdiction, but it certainly impacts our community. And of course, we need to speak up for our community. Thank you.
Okay, further content? No. Okay, it was a motion put forward already and seconded. That do we have the motion put forward to move on this, to approve or not?
The motion it being considered is the motion that was read, that you read earlier. And because we waived the rules, because we moved all of these things to reconsider, is now the opportunity.
Okay, so I call the vote. All in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Carries. Moving on to consideration of bylaws. Bylaws 2022-18 being a bylaw to amend the zoning bylaw 2002 as amended of the corporation of the town of Penetanguishene to remove H symbol from 52 MacArthur Drive, and that the council of the town of Penetanguishene introduce the following bylaw 2022-18, and that bylaws be read first time, deemed to be read a second time, and carried. Mover and a seconder, Councillor Cummings, Councillor Rose, all in favor? That is carried, thank you. Now we come to a question period from media and public, and I don't believe we have any there. So announcements and inquiry. So who do we have? Yeah. Yeah. So do we have anybody from the public that's wanting to ask a question? No. So then we go to announcements and inquiries. Are there any announcements or inquiries? There being none. Confirmation bylaw 2022-19. That the confirmation bylaw 2022-19 be signed and sealed by the mayor and the clerk. Mover, Councillor Rose, Councillor Buttawalkera, all in favor. And that is carried. Adjournment, Councillor LaRose, or Cummings. Well, you have to understand, I don't want to take his job away from him. So with that, the regular council meeting is adjourned. And then we, I think we'll take a 5-minute break.
but hey, things will get better with time. I've
Okay, members of council and staff, we will resume our Committee of the Whole meeting of Wednesday, April 13th, and I call the meeting to order. Approval of the agenda for the Committee of the Whole, that the recommended action and the Committee of the Whole agenda for April 13, 2022 be approved as presented. Mover and a seconder. Councillor Cummings and Councillor Sandoval, all in favor. Declaration of pecuniary interest, if anyone so has, so declare or at the appropriate time. Presentations and delegations, all sections, and we do have a presentation from the Wastewater Treatment Division, the Chief Operator Mark Charlebois, and I believe that is going to be done by video, Sarah.
And ran at 57% of the plant rate. Greetings, Mayor LaRue and Council. The following is a video slide presentation of the 2021 annual reports for both wastewater treatment plants and the 5 sewage pump stations. A detailed report is also sent to the Ministry of Environment and is also available to the public on the town website. Both plants are running great. They produced a high quality final effluent, and the loadings to Penetang Bay were well below the regulatory limits and the Severn Sound Environmental Association objectives. Main Street Sewage Plant average daily flows increased 4.8% and ran at 57% of the plant rated capacity. Fox Street flows increased 27% and ran at 56% of the rated capacity. Combined flows together, both plants were up 5.5%. One small bypass overflow was reported at the Fox Street sewage plant. That's the second one since the plant was built in '86. 5 spills that were petroleum based, same as last year, were reported to SAC, but were contained within the plant. All the federal provincial reporting requirements were met and submitted. There was one minor total phosphorus monthly concentration exceedance reported at the Fox Street sewage plant only in July. Main Street sewage plant passed a toxicity test 7 years in a row, which indicates a low toxicity effluent discharge to fish and aquatic life. The Fox Dechlor project was put online in manual mode and is awaiting final commissioning in 2022. So the chart on the left shows bypasses in the last 10 years. The blue line shows raw sewage bypasses. You can see we had a slight one at Fox Street in 2021. We haven't had any at Main Street since 2014 when the new stormwater equalization tank was installed, which is great news. And you can see on the chart on the right there shows the hours of bypass. You can see we've come a long way. Like back in 1975, there shows over 2,700 hours of bypass when the plants were exceeding capacity. And even during the mid 80s there, you can see there were some pretty big spikes. But last year, you can see we had 2.4 hours. That was that little bypass at Fox Street. But there's been some vast improvements over the years, that's for sure. There were 5 spills at the Main Street plant reported to SAC in 2021, same as last year. A petroleum product was visibly noticed floating on the aeration tanks and the clarifiers, and we could smell it as well. It was contained within the plant and dissipated in the aeration tanks within a day or two. We installed absorbent socks to help absorb the petroleum product, and no further action was required by the Ministry of Environment. Following the events, the roads crew investigated the collection system, but could not determine the source. They did think that they found the source last year, but the results were inconclusive. So further investigation is planned for 2022. So the Main Street plant treated about 78.3% of the town flows. Fox Street, the remaining 21.7% of the town total combined flows. Main Street plant services residential and all the industrial and commercial flows. The Central North Correctional Center flows are treated at the Fox Street plant. Waypoint flows are treated at their own plant. Fox Street daily flows increased 27%, and collection system investigations are planned for 2022. It was a very wet year, and we had a raw bypass event recorded in June at the Fox Street plant as well due to heavy rains. Sludge haulage and land application is currently contracted with Region of Huronia Environmental Services. They also look after the field soil sampling, they arrange for testing, they apply for the NASM plans with area farmers on behalf of the town. All the biosolid samples of sludge were well within provincial regulations for metals. The ATAD digesters, autothermophilic aerobic digesters, produce a Class A biosolids, one of the best biosolid quality in the county. Since the startup of the ATAD, there was several challenges such as high-level foam alarms. Optimization has been ongoing and recently producing some very good results where we've reduced the foam levels and alarms. Last year, we had 0 high foam callouts and alarms, down from 27 callouts in 2020. That's a 100% decrease. That's a savings of about $5,000 a year. Biosolids volumes hauled and cost. These charts show trending over the last 10 years. The chart on the left shows volumes hauled. You can see we were hauling about 12,000 cubic meters a year before the expansion. And since the expansion, we've been hauling about half of that, about 6,000 cubic meters per year in the last few years. chart on the right shows cost in the last 10 years. We were spending over $250,000 a year prior to the plant expansion at Main Street. And the last few years, we've been hovering about $60,000. That's also partly because we don't rent the winter storage lagoon from Region any longer. And like I said, we're hauling half of the sludge volume, so we're saving quite a bit of money there. Less volume hauled equals less money spent. So these charts show the combined hydro costs for both sewage plants. As mentioned last year, prior to the expansion, hydro costs were just over $200,000 a year, and after the expansion, upwards of $500,000. So the savings in reduced sludge volumes that we mentioned on the previous slide have been offset by the additional hydro costs in running the new biosolids facility. Other costs such as polymer and natural gas has also offset some of these sludge haulage savings as well. We shut down one of the ATAD digesters in 2018, as you can see on the chart there, and there wasn't quite enough food to run both anyway, so we shut one down, and it is nice to have the redundant tank there for future. And this resulted in a huge savings in hydro as well. So now we're spending about $400,000 a year as opposed to $500,000. Chart on the right just shows the cost in cents per kilowatt hour over the last 10 years. Alum was tendered this year with a 45% increase per dry metric ton. Alum is added to the wastewater plants to precipitate phosphorus and allow for the removal from the waste stream and prevent it from overloading the bay with nutrients that can cause eutrophication. Phosphorus is recycled into the sludge biosolids and spread on the farmland as a beneficial nutrient for specific crops. Rising aluminum costs are a result of supply and demand drivers. Prices for the raw materials have been pushed to a 10-year high this year. We were spending about $50,000 a year on aluminum sulfate, and now we will be spending about $78,000 per year. So maintenance and calibrations, regular preventive maintenance and calibrations were conducted on plant equipment. Annual calibration verifications were performed on the flow meters. Annual service and monthly tests were conducted on the emergency backup generators at both plants and the pump stations as well. Critical alarms were tested regularly, such as bypass alarms, high-level sensors, and safety-related alarms. Safety inspections were performed on the lifting equipment and confined space entry-related equipment and calibrations. The gas detection systems in the biosolids and the headworks buildings at Main Street were verified for calibration for explosion-rated rooms. Backflow preventers for potable water were tested as well. We began doing more in-house pump rebuilds as well to try to save money on outside contractors. Sewage pump stations. Sewage pump stations are being maintained and operating properly. No overflows to report at any of the sewage pump stations. Navy Lane Station was replaced in 2018 and is running very well. Last year, we replaced a PLC at the Jennings Station, which is an electronic programmable logic controller. All stations have backup generators, in exception to Navy Lane and Jennings stations, where we utilize a portable generator when needed during extended power fails. In the long run, we're looking at installing generators under capital to minimize potential issues during extended power fails. And here's And here's a picture of the 5 sewage pump stations. The wastewater team. The wastewater team. Pat LeClaire, Dave Murray, Mark Charlebois, and Laura Reimer.
Thank you, Mark, for the presentation. And is Mark available for any questions, Sarah? Yes. Members of council, does anyone have any questions through to Mark? No? Yes, okay. Who do I see? Oh, Councillor Levy, okay, go. Actually, I'm seeing her in 2 places. I'm looking there and I can actually see you here.
Thank you, Mr.
Go
Mayor.
ahead,
Through to Mark, with your indulgence, Mr. Mayor, I have 2 questions, if you would permit it. First of all, I wanted to ask Mark regarding the very high hydro costs, which are not going down anytime soon. The building looks to me like a perfect place for solar panels. Has this been considered?
We actually asked about that prior to the design phase with AECOM, but they weren't willing to entertain that. So there's nothing in the works right now, but I was all for it. And I mean, it would be something to look at for sure.
So I guess that's a no, but maybe.
Maybe.
Thank you very much. Mr. Mayor, if I may, just a very brief one. The Waypoint plant, I'm wondering, Mark, if you didn't give us any information on that. Are you privy to any test results, et cetera, from the Waypoint plant?
No, I don't see any of that stuff. Actually, Ontario Clean Water Agency operates that plant.
And they don't have to report to the province?
They probably do, but I don't get any information from them at all. They have their own.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Rademacher?
Thank you, Worship. Hello, Mark. Thank you for your presentation. What struck me was the peak flow on December 12th and 13th of 22 cubic meters. I remember those days a few years ago, prior to the town embarking on the sewer separation program for Main Street, Harriet, Mariah, et cetera, et cetera. What's generating that now that we've done all that work? Is there still more sewers to separate, or what's your thoughts? Thank you.
I believe that was a heavy rainfall event that we had that generated that peak flow. But yeah, there's still a few issues more on the north side of town right now. As you noticed, I think I mentioned in the report that the flows at Fox Street were up 27%. Right now, the plant's running about 73% of capacity. So I think Brian's had some camera work done in the last couple of weeks, and they identified some leaky sewers. And I think with the groundwater levels being so high right now, I believe the way Brian explained it, the water mains are probably surcharged. They're underneath the level of the groundwater. So any cracks in the pipe will generate extra flow. So right now that's in the works. And like I said, Brian's been busy getting some camera work done, trying to seal up those leaks, basically.
Thank you, Mark.
Questions, Councillor Cumming. Thank you, Worship. Just a question, Mark. You say that the Fox Street plant is handling anything from the super jail or CNCC. Is it possible that there's increased flows up there because of the population increase up there?
I'm not sure what's coming out of the building. I did check with the water department, and not much has changed for water consumption. So I wouldn't think much has changed with the wastewater discharge. They've had some issues up there with their wastewater flow meter over the years, and it never did correlate exactly with the water meter up there. So, but I'm not aware of the population changes up there, but I believe that we have some sampling that we're going to do up there. So.
Brian has his hand up. Maybe Brian, you can elaborate.
Thank you, Your Worship. Turn to my camera here. Yeah, just further to what the Chief Water Operator had said, we are doing I&I investigations on the Fox Street sanitary sewer. We have identified a number of large leaks in the sewer, primarily through leaks around the connections, not so much in the pipe itself, but actually the connections to the sewers. So we're looking at doing some robotic grouting of those connections to seal up the sewer, because Mark had indicated that these higher flows at Fox Street started primarily in the fall of 2020, and we're actually seeing them carry through to today's date. So we're looking at sealing those. And actually, one of them is actually going to be sealed as part of the beginnings of the Champlain Shores pre-servicing. So they're gonna help us out by uncovering one of the connections that is leaking and sealing that up for us as part of the work.
Madam Deputy Mayor.
Just following up, Brian or Mark, on the question of solar paneling. Why was that set aside so quickly? Who can answer that? Because I think it's would be a very good idea. Looking at the cost of our electricity, maybe solar paneling would be an asset on that building.
Yeah, certainly. I don't know the specific reason why it was not pursued, but we can definitely look at options associated with that. I know in previous years, having examined the feasibility of putting it on public works buildings and other buildings in the area, I know the payback period was a little lengthy, and based on the capital costs, high capital costs associated with putting them on the building and the roof, and the operational needs of getting up on the roof and moving equipment around on the roof could have played a part in denying it, because there are equipment on the roof that needs to be gotten to, and having the solar panels might have been an impediment to that. So, and based on the buyback and the savings associated with that, it might not have been feasible at the time. But we can definitely look at it.
Well, I think it's worth looking at. You know, we need to try to do what we can to save our environment, and that's one thing perhaps that would help. So we just would like to see it on a list, something to look for in the future. That's all, just not to brush it aside and forget about it. Thank you.
Further questions through the microphone? No. Okay, Mark, thank you very much for the presentation. Well done, and thank you for the great work you do for the municipality.
Thank you. One thing I was going to mention, and Debbie Levy asked, Councillor Levy asked this last year about the surveillance program for wastewater. I have a meeting set up for next week, actually. We've been on the waiting list for this program, and it looks like they're adding 2 more partners, and they want to include us in that sampling program for wastewater for COVID-19. So I should know soon enough. I believe it's covered by the province now. And as mentioned, I have a meeting that's probably going to happen next week with the lab, the Ministry of Environment, and the health unit, actually. So it's looking pretty good. So we're looking forward to that.
Very good. Thank you, Mark. And good luck with it.
Thank you.
Okay. Now we move on to council information package, the council information package of March 23, 2022 and April 6, 2022. And the recommended action is that the council information package, having been given due consideration, be received for information. Does anyone have anything they want to pull from it? Councillor LaRose.
Thank you, Your Worship. On April 6, item 2A.
Okay. And so we could get a mover and a second on the balance. And Councillor LaRose.
Could I also pull item number 2B and from the April 6th?
Okay, item 2B, that's good. Okay.
Thank you.
If I may worship, but if I am, there we are.
What are you pulling, Madam Deputy?
Number 5, I'm not sure in which section it was, CIP, the letter from Friends Officer Ken Palin, the request.
That's the one that is.
That one, good, thank you.
It's already pulling that one. Okay, so we have the two that are being pulled. So can I have a mover and a seconder for the balance? Councillor Mayat and Councillor Sinema, and all in favor. All right, so now we will deal with IB, Councillor Rose.
Thank you, Your Worship. I was approached by a small group of Main Street merchants as well as some local residents, and they would like council's blessing to install a plaque on the fencing of the Canada House parking lot for the recognition of Captain Ken and his almost 50 years on Main Street. So this way it would be behind the little bench facing his restaurant. So they wanted to know if we were all right with that. They are more than willing to accommodate all the money for it, which is quite substantial. That's what they would like from us.
I think that is a good idea, Councillor Rose, and I'm wondering, would you be adverse to having staff prepare a report back and deal with it? I'm sure that it would be a favorable report.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we refer that back to staff. Madam? And then Madam Senwa.
Thank you, Your Worship. Item 2B was in regards to a letter about buses parked on Owen Street, and I just wanted to bring it up and possibly have a quick report from I believe it's our Brian Murray from
Public Works
from
Director.
Public Works. Thank you.
So Brian, you have a report on that? I believe it's the Owen Street.
Owen Street, the bus is on Owen Street.
The crossing there. Mr. CAO, will you?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm not sure if Brian was prepared to speak to it or not, but I'll maybe take a stab at it, and then if the Director of Public Works wants to fill in any gaps, please feel free to, Brian. This matter has been reviewed by staff. Both of our bylaw enforcement officers, as well as our Director of Public Works, met on site last week to address the concern from the resident. The staff were able to identify that there were a handful of buses that were parked on the west side of Owen Street alongside the sidewalk. They were parked for approximately 10 to 15 minutes before they moved on to Canadian Martyrs School. From staff's perspective, the buses were not found to be parking in a manner that's prohibited and in contravention of any of our bylaws. Staff's perspective is they do not lessen the two-way traffic. And further concerns of pedestrians or users of the trail was not found. So no concerns from staff perspective. Staff has identified that the parking in this particular location is the same that we have in the remainder of the community as well as other schools, albeit there might be some slight differences. At the end of staff's assessment, staff aren't recommending any changes to this location. Staff were going to close the loop and follow up with the particular with the resident that submitted the letter late last week, just to close that circle and close that loop with her. Mr. Mayor, if our Director of Public Works has anything to add, I would ask, if with your permission, that he be given that opportunity. Thank you.
Brian, do you have any comments on it?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, we attended the site last Friday, myself and the bylaw officers. Certainly, with the initial communication with the residents, we were looking for incidents where there were bylaw infractions, associated with the parking. We didn't see any at the time. We didn't, nor did we see any impediments to traffic in the area at the time. And this was obviously during the school being let out at the end of the day, where there was, the busy time of the day coming out. So we didn't see any issues with the way they were parking. And in fact, we thought it was actually a good spot for them to wait while they wait for to drive over to Canadian Martyrs. So didn't see any issues there.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Worship. Just to go back to the plaque a second, if the plaque is being paid for by this group and there's no cost to the municipality, is there any reason why we have to go and get a staff report? Can we not just vote on it here and direct staff to find an appropriate spot?
I would be fine with that, and I'm sure they would too. I think it might have been appropriate that some of our staff had mentioned that they would like to see the size and the actual wording, which is all done. There was a letter, I believe, somewhere in the package. If council's fine with that, we could, instead of having a council report, vote on it tonight and just have them work with Sherry or Roy, in the Parks Division, or Brian's guys, doesn't matter, just for the physical placement. I would be more than happy with that.
I would support that, Your Worship. I think the only concern I would have is that we would be privy and to the size and the wording to make sure that everything is appropriate. That's all.
Madam Deputy Mayor. Here. I have seen it at 18 inches by 16 inches, and they're just down to the nitty gritty on the wording. It's very, very nice, professionally done. I'm sure we will all be happy with it, but if you would like to see it first, I can make sure that the final draft is circulated to everybody.
That would be nice, just to see the final draft. Thank you. Or do we CAO?
Yes, Mr. CAO, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I was just going to add that there's really no need for it to come through a staff report unless council feels there's a need. Certainly staff can take it back and review it from both the RCS as well as Public Works perspective to ensure there's no concerns, and then proceed with it if that's what council would like. I don't think we need to return with the staff report.
Mr. Director.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just to add to what the CAO has said, I'm just wondering if it would be prudent to, if it is going to be mounted on the fencing behind the bench, and I think I know the area that we're speaking of, and it's being mounted on property or town property owned by the town. It might not be a bad idea to do some sort of an agreement or license to figure out who's maintaining the sign going forward, because obviously with the business owners that are there right now, that might not be the case into the future. So that's clarifying who's responsible for the sign going forward. Whether it's the town, then so be it. But maybe that would be a good idea to clarify going forward.
Well, the sign itself would be going on town-owned bench?
Or the fencing behind the
fencing behind, okay. So we have further comment?
Yeah, thank you, your mayor, Mr. Mayor. I would just suggest that these are some of the sorts of details that we can work our way through with the group. Potential agreement, potential location, who's gonna, maintain it moving forward. These are all things that if at a staff level, council's comfortable giving that to us to kind of work our way through with the other group. Our Director of Public Works has raised a good point, and there's potentially other points as well that we need to just kind of have a conversation about. But I would certainly be more than comfortable if council would agree to push it back to staff, and we can manage that with the group as opposed to coming back through a staff report. If there's a need for an agreement, certainly we can bring that forward to council as required, but I don't want it to hold up the process necessarily.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Cummings.
Thank you, Your Worship. That's exactly what I was looking at. Like, get council's blessing, let the staff take over from here. As long as council's in agreement for the sign, then let staff take it from here. They know what sign bylaw is, they know what positioning would be, and all the details. Let them handle that. So I'd make a motion that we approve the sign.
Okay, and seconder, Councillor LaRose, all in favor? And that is carried. Thank you. And I believe that takes care of everything in the strip. And so with that, we will move on to Section A, Transportation and Environmental Services. And I understand Councillor LaRose, you're going to do that.
Yes, Your Worship. I think between the plate glass windows, the double screens, the computer, it'll be bad enough. So rather than Councillor Clue trying to do this through there, it might be easier. So I think we'll possibly get through it. So we'll start off with number 6A, which is our consent agenda. The recommended action that the following consent agenda items have been given due consideration be received for information. We have the Payette and Lepage Water Systems 2021 Consolidated Report and the 2021 Summary Report. If we could have a mover for that, moved by Councillor Sanema, seconded by Deputy Mayor Dubo, all in favor, and that is carried. Moving down to B, we have matters for consideration. Our first one is a boundary road agreement with the Town of Midland, RDS 2022-07. The recommended action that council approve the updated boundary road agreement between the town of Penetanguishene and the town of Midland, and that staff bring forward a bylaw to authorize the entering into a new agreement with the corporation of the town of Midland for the maintenance of the boundary roads and to repeal bylaw 2014-24. Can I have a mover and a seconder before we go to questions? Councillor Cummings, seconded by Councillor Radabon-Cour. Do we have any questions on this? Pretty standard thing. Seeing none, we'll call for the vote. All in favor? And that is carried. Moving down to number 2, we have an encroachment agreement for 2 Le Coron Avenue, RDS 2022-06. The recommended action that an encroachment agreement for the construction of a retaining wall onto the road allowance of Le Coron Avenue by the property municipally known as 2 Le Coron Avenue be approved, and that a bylaw for the agreement be brought forward by staff for council approval. We're looking for a mover and a seconder. Councillor Clue is moving and Councillor Radabon-Cour is seconding. Is there any questions about this? Seeing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor? And that is carried. Number 3 is municipal modernization funding to complete projects, WW-2022-02. And the recommended action that $12,672.41 of municipal modernization funds be utilized to complete the fuel tank upgrade at the Fox Street STP. A mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Sanama, seconded by Councillor Mayette. Is there any questions about that? Seeing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor, and that is carried. Item 4, award of the multi-year tree services tender, RDS 2022-08, and the recommended action that the tree inspection, pruning, removal services tender be awarded to Davy Tree Services for an anticipated annual cost of $30,149.30, including HST, for a 3-year term. We're looking for a mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Vandevancourt, seconded by Councillor Cummings. Do we have any questions about this one? Seeing none, we'll call for the vote. All in favor? And that is carried. Down to number 5. Assumption of road widening parcels on Fuller Avenue and Robert Street East, RDS 2022-09. Recommended that the dedicated road widening parcels plan one. Oh yes, this is the one. Did you want to speak to that, Brian? There's a misprint in the copy, so it's just a little bit of number stuff.
That would be great. Sorry.
Mr. Chair, I can take over for Director of Public Works. He did advise that the motion had been updated, and I can provide that unless the Director of Public Works wants to provide another comment. Okay.
Sorry. Yes. Yes. Thank you, Madam Clerk. Through you, Mr. Chair. The motion in the agenda package was revised. I believe it is correct on the actual report. So the changes are related to the parts that are going to be dedicated through the motion. So that is the change in the motion. So Madam Clerk, if you could read the revised motion.
Absolutely, no problem. So the updated motion, starting from the beginning, that the dedicated road widening parcel, Part 1, Plan 51R-30711, located along the frontage of 1145 Fuller Avenue, be assumed as part of the public highway known as Fuller Avenue, and that the dedicated road widening parcels, Parts 2, 4, 6, and 7, Plan 51R-221223, located on Robert Street East between Dufferin Avenue and Fuller Avenue, be assumed as part of the public highway known as Robert Street East. And finally, that staff be directed to bring forward the necessary bylaw for council approval.
All right, now we're not. So we're taking out 17, 18, 19, 24, that other whole line. All right. So with that, that is just more or less some housekeeping stuff that will be taking place up there. There's no real thing going on. So if I could have a mover and a seconder for that, moved by Councillor Sanama, seconded by Councillor Vandevancourt. Is there any questions about that or clarifications? It was just a typo in the electronic one is correct, the paper one was not. So we'll call for the vote on that. All in favor, and that is carried. Brings us down to number 6, referrals to upcoming agendas. Referrals, that the Transportation Environmental Services section endorse the following additional items and existing referrals to upcoming agendas and staff. We have 3 items on there. Did anybody want any of them taken out, or are there any to add to? Looking around, seeing none. Can I have a mover and a seconder to keep those alive? Councillor Sanama, seconded by Councillor Clue. All in favor? And that is carried. Brings us to D, question period from the medium public. Do we have any questions in there? Nope.
Chair, not really on the agenda, but I do have a question that I would have to put through to our Director of Public Works. On the question that was brought to my attention and really piqued my curiosity is if we've had any result on the flushing of the Robert Street West wells as to the levels of the trichoethylene. Have we had any results, Brian?
Yes, through your worship, through Mr. Chair to his worship. Yes, we have. We've completed our testing for the Robert Street West wells. And as some of you may know, we're actually using those results as part of our secondary water supply Class EA that is currently ongoing to select a secondary water supply source for the Pyatt water system. So we've concluded the testing at Robert Street West, which was done in late 2021. We're looking to bring that information forward as part of the class environmental assessment process to a public information center for the public and council to attend. And that is slated to happen in May or in June, depending on the availability. So that is something, the results of which will be shared with the public at that meeting. And that information will tie into the class environmental assessment process.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. Thank you, Brian. I'm sure that is going to be a big interest for a lot of people that have driven by there for how many years now. We've done testing a few times. It'll be exciting to see. Did we have any other questions? Seeing none, your worship, we are done.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor LaRose. We move on now to Section B, Recreation and Community Services, and we pass it on to Councillor Cummings.
Thank you, your worship. A lot of firsts tonight. First time I've ever come to a council meeting and had it on Zoom. We're all in the same room and yet we're still talking onto a camera. Item 1 or item A on our agenda, or consent agenda, we have the minutes from the Penetang Library Board for January 31st, 2022, March 7th, 2022, the Trails Committee meeting minutes from December 14th, 2021, and the Penetang Public Library report from April 6th, 2022. The recommended action is that the following consent agenda items have been given due consideration to be received for information. I need a mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Sanema, second by Councillor Rose. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. On item B, we have no matters for consideration. And we have no referrals unless someone has something to add to our referrals to upcoming agendas. Seeing none. Question period from the media. Do you have questions? No questions. Back to you, your worship.
Thank you, Councillor Cummings. And with that, we will move on to Section C, Planning and Community Development Services. And I understand, Councillor Boderbunker, you were going to take that.
Yes, thank you, your worship. Councillor Levy has asked me to chair this development community planning and community development services section for tonight. So on our consent agenda, we have 2 items. We have the bylaw enforcement monthly report for March 2022, and we have the Ontario Land Tribunal case management conference minutes for 123 Robert Street East. Does anybody want any of those 2 items pulled? Okay, seeing none, may I have a mover to seconder, Councillor Rose, and a seconder, Councillor Sanema, that the following consent agenda items, having been given due consideration, be received for information. And I read them out. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried. We have several matters for consideration. The first item is site plan application SPA 21-01, 77 Fox Street, bracket Sunshine Village, file number PL 2022-17. And the recommended action is that that site plan control area application SPA 21-01 be approved for the property at 77 Fox Street. Application SPA 21-01 in accordance with the staff report PL 2022-17, subject to final engineering design approval from the Director of Public Works. We have a mover and a seconder to put it on the table. Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor and Councillor Cummings, second. So we have it on the floor. We did have a couple of questions at our section meeting. Chair Levy I don't know if you got an answer to your question that you asked at section, but maybe I'll just turn it over to our planner and maybe, Councillor Levy. Did you want to address the group?
Yes, my question is to Jamie or Owen regarding the, there's a lot of feedback. Okay, regarding the life lease designation that this is being marketed under, does that have any bearing on our approval of the builds? Because we have had no discussions at the council table about permitting life lease into our community. It's very different from land lease. It's something none of us really know. Well, I've been researching it, but I'd like perhaps Jamie's feedback on the first question is permitting them to move forward tied to a life lease model. And secondly, a quick description of what life lease is. Thank you.
Thank you, through your worship, to the member of council. I'll do my best to try to explain the life lease situation. Now, firstly, it's a form of tenure which has no real bearing on a site plan application. This is a section 41 site plan application that's before council this evening. So no, the form of tenure has no real impact on the site plan itself. What a life lease community is, as best as I understand it, is folks have the ability to enter into a long-term agreement for the use and occupation of a building within that community, and it goes along with them for their lifespan. But I don't believe they have any interest in the land per se. So it's not like it's a conveyable piece of land or a conveyable lease to somebody else, but it is a long-term arrangement. So, but no real Planning Act implications to the best of my knowledge.
Thank you.
Just a follow-up, if I may. Do we or will we get a say on permitting that type of tenure in our community?
Jamie, I think you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I think we'd have this figured out by now, but through your worship to the councillor, as far as life lease communities and life leases, again, it's not a specific interest in land. There's a section in the Planning Act, section 50, which deals with the subdivision of land that does contain some regulation, or does contain some information with respect to those sorts of situations and leases. And so I don't believe it would come back to council. There could be a committee adjustment application that's required, but not a council approval with respect to that. And if there's any sort of detailed questions about it, the applicant's planner is available, Janet Foster, and she could certainly speak to these questions as well if council would permit it.
Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you. So with respect to the report, Owen or Jamie, did you want to elaborate on anything in the report, or are you satisfied at this point?
Your worship, Owen did have a presentation, or was going to walk through the report if council would like him to do that. So we're sort of in your hands if you'd like to hear that or not.
If there's, I'll ask if there's any questions from members of council. Maybe we can go that route. If there are any other questions, council seeing none from this side. I'll look up Councillor Clue, Councillor Levy. I don't see the yellow cards. Any questions? Yes, Madam Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just what this means that the building, there'll be rentals. People will not purchase, but they will rent. Is that correct?
That's correct.
I was just curious, that's all. I mean, if our staff is satisfied, then for sure, no problem. I was just curious as to that aspect of the project, that's all. Thank you.
Any other questions from members of council? So we had it moved and seconded. So I'll read the recommendation. Actually, I read it already, so I don't think I need to read it again. Thank you, Councillor Rose. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the presentation and approval of the final comprehensive zoning bylaw. And the recommended action is, whereas section 26(9) of the Planning Act requires a municipality to update their zoning bylaw to conform with the official plan within 3 years of the official plan coming into effect. And whereas the town's new official plan came into effect on June 25th, 2019, and whereas the zoning bylaw review project was initiated in May of 2019, and whereas the zoning bylaw review open house was held on February 15th, 2022, and the statutory public meeting was held on February 23rd, 2022, as required by the Planning Act. Now, therefore, council approves the adoption of the new townwide comprehensive zoning bylaw 2022-17 as presented. So that's the motion. We have a mover and a seconder. Councillor Sanama, and seconded by Councillor Rose. So it's on the table. I'll turn it over to our planner. Owen, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The zoning bylaw review project started in 2019 with Meridian Planning Consultants. The new zoning bylaw, which is attachment 1 to the staff report, will replace the existing bylaw in its entirety and will address some of the emerging land use patterns we've been seeing in the town as of late, as well as implement some of the best practices in a user-friendly way. The purpose of the draft is primarily to enter into conformity with the adopted official plan in 2019. And under the Planning Act, municipalities must update their zoning bylaw to be in conformity with the plan within 3 years since the adoption, which in this case for the town's official plan was June 25th, 2019. So that brings us to June 25th, 2022. There were many revisions since the first draft that was released publicly back in December 2021. And I will leave it to Allison from Meridian Planning to begin her brief presentation to summarize the comments we received to date and the changes that have occurred since the first draft was released to the public. And with your permission, Mr. Chair, I would invite Allison to begin her presentation and have Sarah share the presentation on the screen.
Good evening, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? Yes, great. Okay, thumbs up. Thank you very much. All right, so I'll just jump right in. Our last touch point on this particular project was in February when we had our statutory public meeting. We received a number of comments back from the public. Since that time, we've also worked with the steering committee, and I'm pleased now tonight to bring forward a final zoning bylaw for your consideration. Next slide, please. So very quickly, this is the process that we have proceeded through. As Owen mentioned, this project was initiated in 2019 on the heels of the county approval of the town's official plan at that time. And we are now in a position that we can recommend approval of the bylaw to the committee and council. Next slide, please. So again, this is somewhat recap, but the goals and objectives throughout have been a key driver has been the official plan conformity and to implement the policies of the official plan. We have worked with the repeal and replace model. So the existing bylaw will be repealed in its entirety and replaced with the new one. We have updated the bylaw to reflect contemporary terminology, best practices, and to address emerging land use trends. Next slide, please. So we have introduced a new zone structure. What we have done is consolidated a number of zones. In particular with the residential zones, you have many right now with only very small variances between them. But the zone categories have been broken down between residential, mixed use commercial, shoreline, employment, and then a collection of other zones which capture those other land uses such as institutional, rural, open space, environmental, and deferred development. And the map that you see there on the right-hand side, that is the latest version of the official plan schedule. And you'll see there that it is both indicative of color, and if you were to zoom in, you would see labels to try and make that a bit more user-friendly. Next slide, please. In terms of public consultation and outreach, there have been a number of opportunities throughout that program to reach out to the members of the public. Early on in 2019, when the project was initiated, there was a council workshop and a public open house. We had a little bit of a COVID hiatus there, but we have come back to this and worked very hard over the last 8 to 10 months, where we've had a number of formal opportunities where we've met with the steering committee, the committee of the whole, and we've had open houses and statutory public meetings. In addition to that, we've had a number of informal opportunities for public consultation. So the town staff have done a very good job of maintaining the project website on Connect Penetanguishene. The planning staff have also done a series of weekly Q&A sessions on Zoom, and we have also circulated to the county and other agencies. Next slide, please. So in terms of the feedback that we have received since we last had our touch point in February, it generally can be grouped into three classifications or three groups of comments, being short-term rentals, in particular where they're permitted, the regulations and compatibility with residential uses. Shoreline structures, we heard back from the public, there was a need to simplify the regulations that appeared in the first draft, which we have done. We have significantly simplified them. And then there was some comments back from the county in terms of a few things that they wanted added into the bylaw. Next slide, please. So in terms of short-term rentals, what the bylaw does is establish the very basic framework for short-term rentals in the town. These zoning provisions would establish the framework that works in conjunction with any municipal licensing system that may be brought forward as well. The zoning really only addresses issues in terms of where short-term rentals are permitted. It requires that they are only permitted on a lot fronting on an open and municipally maintained road, and that is for emergency access. And then it also prohibits short-term rentals in conjunction with a number of other uses on the same lot to regulate the intensity of the use of that residential lot. In terms of where they are permitted, short-term rentals are proposed to be permitted in a detached dwelling only, in the shoreline area and in the rural zones. They're also permitted to be, they're also proposed to be permitted in dwelling units above ground related commercial uses and in multiple dwellings in the downtown and waterfront zone. Short-term rentals are not permitted as of right in the residential 1 or the residential 2 zone. Any existing short-term rentals in these locations will be recognized as legal non-conforming. Now, in terms of why we are not permitting short-term rentals in the R1 and R2 zone, I wanted to address that very specifically, but in particular, that is because how short-term rentals relate to the housing supply within the town and how those two things are actually interrelated specifically within those R1 and R2 zones. Next slide, please. So this slide actually provides a diagram to help work through the logic for that. So you'll see at the top, there is a picture of a single detached dwelling. Coming down, that single detached dwelling could be used either for residential purposes or for a short-term rental. If you follow that down through the left-hand column that's shaded blue, where that detached dwelling is used for a residential purpose, it provides a minimum of 1 dwelling unit to the town's housing supply, up to a maximum of 3 dwelling units. That's because the province has mandated that the town must now also permit additional dwelling units. So out of that 1 single detached dwelling, you have a potential housing supply contribution of 3 units to the town's housing supply, which also potentially adds to the supply of affordable and attainable housing units. If you turn your attention over to the green column on the right, sorry, I think I said the right earlier, that was left. If you turn your attention over to the green column on the right for the short-term rental, that short-term rental is not providing any housing to the housing supply within the town. In fact, it is actually taking that housing supply out of the town, what the town has to work with. So in terms of the housing supply contribution, that represents a negative net loss of between 1 and 3 dwelling units because that single detached dwelling is now being used for the short-term rental or commercial purposes, as opposed to contributing to that housing supply. That also manifests in a potential lack of affordable housing or attainable housing or a lack of opportunity for that. So I wanted to bring that forward in a very clear picture that in that residential 1 and residential 2 zone, not permitting short-term rentals is actually being driven in particular by a lot of the official plan policies that dictate that we protect and maintain housing supply. That is why, for that reason, we haven't permitted them in the R1 and the R2 zones. Now, that said, again, any existing short-term rentals may continue as a legal non-conforming use. Next slide, please. All right, short-term structure, or sorry, shoreline structures was the other area where we had a lot of public comments. And currently in the bylaw, there are really 3 main areas that are regulated. One is a setback from the high water mark. The other is a provision that permits a dock, as well as setbacks from the lot lines. We are carrying forward those 3 aspects of the zoning into the new bylaw. So the new bylaw all still requires that all accessory buildings and structures must be set back 15 meters from the high water mark, which is identified as the 100-year flood level or the 178-meter elevation. That specific policy is also in the official plan. So we are implementing official plan policy in carrying that forward. But what we've done is provided a bit more clarification that recognizes the existing circumstances and the existing provisions. So there's been a notwithstanding clause added that says, notwithstanding water-related accessory shoreline structures, being those structures that require direct access to the water as an operational necessity, may be located closer than that 15-meter setback from the high water mark. And then we've been even a bit more specific to include a clause that water-related accessory shoreline structures include a boathouse, a boat port, a boat lift, a boat launch, a ramp, a dock, or a pump house, but they do not include a sauna or a hot tub. So in many respects, we are really just carrying forward the existing provisions and adding a bit of clarity there. Next slide, please. Docks. Right now, one dock is permitted on a shoreline property up to a maximum length of 30 meters. We're simply carrying that forward. The new provision that we are adding to the bylaw is the maximum width of shoreline structures. So what the provision that is being added, what that does is it regulates the amount of the shoreline that may be occupied by these water-related accessory structures. So again, that's your boathouse, your dock, your boat lift, your boat ramp, all of those things. So those structures may not exceed more than 25% of the width of the lot at the shoreline. And it's measured along that 178 meter elevation. Most of the lots within that shoreline area are zoned SA1. They have a minimum frontage of 30 meters, which is ballpark 100 feet, little less than 100 feet. Some are a little bit more, some are a little bit less, but overwhelmingly most are within that 30 meter range. In that circumstance, with this 25% linear measurement, that means that 7.5 meters of that frontage, or 25 feet of that frontage, could be occupied by shoreline structures. So that, again, is put in place to implement some of the natural heritage and the hazard land policies within the official plan. Next slide, please. In terms of the standards that apply to shoreline structures, what we've done is to apply the town-wide regulations for accessory buildings and structures within the shoreline area. So we have simplified those requirements. How this translates in the shoreline area is that these shoreline structures must now only be set back 1.2 meters from side lot lines. So that is a reduction. And we have provided a little bit of clarity. Again, this is for the technical writing of the bylaw and how it's put together, but we have specifically permitted water-related accessory buildings and structures in the front yard on a shoreline property. That is because in a shoreline property, the front yard is actually the yard adjacent to the shoreline, not the yard adjacent to the road. Next slide, please. And these are the policies of the official plan specifically that these shoreline structures implement. So that's the natural environment, flood hazards, and shoreline areas. Next slide, please. And finally, the County of Simcoe, when circulated the bylaw, had a few comments. They asked us to insert a zone provision requiring a setback from the county road, Highway 93, basically that it's in accordance with the county bylaw. They also requested the addition of a waste disposal influence area holding zone. Essentially what that is where there is either an active or a closed waste disposal site, that a 500 meter radius is drawn around that. And within that, no development may occur unless it can be demonstrated there will be no adverse effects to persons or property as a result of those active or closed waste disposal sites. In terms of demonstration of that, simply any development must conform to the Town of Penetanguishene official plan. And if there's any studies required, the results of those or recommendations must be implemented, and the results must be within acceptable levels in accordance with provincial and other agency requirements. Next slide, please. Again, within that waste disposal influence area overlay, any existing uses that are there now are permitted to continue. And we've also given some exclusions to a number of scenarios, those being interior alterations to buildings or structures, exterior alterations that do not expand the footprint of an existing building or structure. So, replacing the siding, replacing the roof, that kind of thing. New structures or alterations that are not habitable, so a garden shed. and any new buildings or structures that do not require a building permit. So those are all exclusions to the requirements to that overlay zone. Next slide, please. And this map just shows you where that occurs. So what you're looking at is the purple line. There's one up there at the northeast tip of Penetang Harbor. And yeah, thank you. And there's another one down in the bottom by the town of Midland label. There are fairly large parcels down there, so this actually doesn't affect a terrible number of properties. There are some smaller properties. I believe that's Tay Point Road, if I'm not mistaken, but it doesn't really affect too many properties. Next slide, please. And finally, our recommendation now is that the bylaw be brought forward for adoption by council, and that it be considered at the May 11th, 2022 meeting. Next slide, please. And with that, we will go to any questions or discussion.
Thank you, Allison, for the presentation. I'll open it up now for questions. I have Councilor Rose and Deputy Mayor Jubal. So, Councilor Rose, please.
Mine is quick. I was just wondering about the third slide in. Not mute. Yeah, we're all right. On about the third slide in, they showed some commercial properties and school properties, and I believe I just had a quick look at the map. It looked like PSS was still zoned as a school property, and I wonder with the demolition, should that be changed just before this goes through?
At this point, I don't know what the future use of that property would be. Certainly, it is showing as institutional. I'm not sure that it would be prudent to change this at this time unless there is a known redevelopment for that property. But I would recommend that it be left as is.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Madam Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mute. As part of the steering committee, I can attest that a lot of work has gone into this comprehensive review. It's a much friendlier document, a lot of simple language, so it should be much easier for people to look through it and get to sections that they need to get to. The only area that I struggled with was the short-term rental section. And we've had a great deal of discussion on that. I just wanted to clarify existing units. Once this bylaw is passed, the existing residential units that are being used as short-term rentals, in due course, they will have to apply for a license. Is that correct, Allison?
Yes, that is correct.
We will not be knocking on their door the minute this has passed to get them to come in and get a license. It'll take a period of time to do that. And I know that we are also going to be dealing with a license process, and I do agree with the licensing because I feel that that is one way that we'll be able to have some sense of control. I mean, the whole thing is, I think all of us sitting at this table have used Airbnbs at one time or another, and being good corporate citizens, we don't create problems. And here we are again, having to deal with a very small portion of the population that makes it bad for everyone else. And that's the part that I struggle with. 10% of the people may very well, what I would call bad apples, and we've got 90% or even more of a percentage that do the right things. So I struggle with that. I know that it's here tonight for discussion, and I look forward to further discussion and to see how other members of council feel about this. And of course, it'll come in May for final approval. So I will wait in anticipation of what that does. Allison, I do want to compliment you on all the hard work that you've done. You've done an excellent job in bringing forward a lot of issues. So I do want to compliment you on how you've done that. It's been in a simplistic and understanding for all of us. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Madam Deputy Mayor Allison, did you have a comment in response?
No, the only thing through you to the committee is to point out that in terms of legal nonconformity or the grandfathering of existing uses, that is within the zoning framework. That is not the case with the municipal license that is also being considered. The deputy mayor was quite correct in that. So once a municipal licensing requirement is in place, both existing uses and any future short-term rentals will be required to fulfill those licensing requirements. But the grandfathering of the existing uses does occur through the zoning as a legal non-conforming use.
Thank you. Councillor Cummings?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A question for you, Allison, regarding the grandfathered or not legal non-conforming. If someone were to sell the residence, does the zoning still exist or does it revert back? And I'm talking about the R1, R2.
So the properties will continue to be zoned R1, R2. That doesn't change. When you have a legal non-conforming use, those are uses that are legal under the existing zoning framework, but then obviously with the changes to the zoning bylaw, they no longer are in step with the new bylaw. Those uses are intended to cease to exist over time. So as long as those uses continue to operate and continue to exist, then they maintain that legal non-conforming status. But if they cease to exist, then they are at that point no longer permitted.
Thank you. That's what I needed to know.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? I had a question with respect to the definition of bed and breakfast. When I was reading the bylaw, there are two areas where bed and breakfast is mentioned. It's in the definition section, and then there's some guidelines later in the bylaw. And we discussed this at section, and one of the things that I felt was missing was the identification that the property owner or representative had to be on site while the bed and breakfast is in operation. The current wording makes reference to principal residence, and that leaves, in my opinion, the door open, as was outlined in the memo or the email that's on desk tonight, where you have a property owner who has a secondary residence in Port Severn and was proposing to rent their house out as a short-term rental. In my opinion, a bed and breakfast, the intent of that is to maintain the, offer the traveling public a place to stay, but maintain the residential character of the neighborhood. And traditionally, the owner of the bed and breakfast has been in the residence while the bed and breakfast is in operation. So I don't think the idea of the principal residence is a strong enough measure in our bylaw to prevent potential future abuse of the rule of principal residence versus secondary residence. So I suggested to our planner about potential of adding that language into our zoning bylaw dealing with the owner or representative must be on site during the operation of the bed and breakfast. The second point that I raised is with respect, again, to bed and breakfasts, is the introduction of cooking facilities into the individual units. So traditionally, a bed and breakfast, you stay, as the name says, the next morning you come down, there's a table, and you share breakfast with all the residents. That's why it's called a bed and breakfast. So there has been abuses, and I'll use that term, where some owners have installed cooking facilities in the individual units. So it changes the character then of the bed and breakfast. And so I had suggested to our planner about introducing some provisions within the bylaw that cooking facilities would not be permitted in the individual units. And again, this is to maintain the character of what a traditional bed and breakfast is. So I think Owen did have an opportunity to address those comments. I'm not sure, Allison, if you had an opportunity to review them, but I appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Certainly. I did speak to Owen about this, and I have come prepared with a possible solution to that. I have a revised definition of a bed and breakfast, as well as a definition for cooking facilities. I can read those out to you if you like, and if the committee is happy with those, a motion can be passed to recommend adoption of the bylaw with this modification and provide this wording to the clerk. So would you like me to read the revised definition at this point in time? Is that something you'd like me to do?
Yes, please, Allison.
Okay. So the revised definition that I have is a bed and breakfast means an owner-occupied single detached dwelling in which guest rooms, which may include private sanitary facilities but may not include in-room cooking facilities, provide temporary sleeping accommodation to the traveling or vacationing public for compensation to the owner of the dwelling unit, and which may or may not include the provision of meals. Do you feel that would address some of your concerns?
Thank you, Allison. It's a very comprehensive definition. I think it's worthy of consideration. I like to read as well, so I'd like to read it and just understand it clearly. So perhaps you could provide it to the clerk, and it could be circulated. We could have an opportunity to review it.
Okay, so that's what I will do. I can circulate that along with the definition for cooking facilities as well.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? I have another comment, and that has to do with some of the public input that we received at our public meeting. And it goes back to the discussion about a bed and breakfast versus a short-term rental. We had a number of people participate in the public meeting that were describing, in my opinion, a bed and breakfast where they live in the residence and they offer a room for rent. And they were quite concerned about the short-term rental policies coming forward. And I'm trying to make it clear in my mind, and hopefully the public's mind, that there is a distinction between a bed and breakfast and a short-term rental. And the distinction is that the bed and breakfast, the owner is there, and a short-term rental, the owner is an absentee owner and just rents the unit. And where the municipality, to my understanding, has experienced issues is with short-term rentals, where the owner has not been present. Bed and breakfasts, I'm not aware of. We've received complaints in that regard, and I stand to be corrected, but maybe we have. I don't know. But I think the key there is that the owner is present. The owner is there to kind of oversee where, for some, and the deputy mayor alluded to this, for some unscrupulous owners, they rent, and the people that attend are very disruptive. And it's that small group of people that has caused concern and has generated a lot of angst in the community about short-term rentals. So there is a distinction, and I think it's important that we're clear in our zoning bylaw with respect to that distinction. Thank you. Yes, Allison.
Just also to follow up on that, I would add to that that there are two other significant distinctions. One is that a bed and breakfast does not remove housing out of the housing supply. It is still first and foremost a dwelling unit. The second is that a bed and breakfast is explicitly permitted within the official plan in the neighborhood areas, the shoreline areas, and the rural areas. So the official plan gives very explicit permission for that, which we then, of course, must implement through the zoning.
Any other questions? Oh, Councillor Rose.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just to be sure, if this zoning bylaw goes through as is, STRs would only be allowed in the downtown core and R1.
Through Mr. Chair to
Okay.
Councillor LaRose, short-term rentals would only be permitted in the shoreline zones, in the rural zone, and in the downtown waterfront zone. They would not be permitted in R1, and they would not be permitted in the R2 zone either.
Any other questions or comments? Oh, sorry. I got the screen here. I got you up there. Councillor Clue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to echo what Deputy Mayor mentioned about being on this working group and working through this over the years now. With Allison's assistance, I think we've come a long way, and I'm quite happy with this zoning bylaw before council tonight. In terms of the short-term rental discussion, I have been in the camp of wanting to preserve housing, so I haven't really been coming around to the idea of short-term rentals. However, I'm happy with what we're proposing in terms of the zoning. And also just a reminder to council that what we're recommending here tonight, what we're looking to pass is in terms of as of right permissions. So there's nothing to stop someone coming forward in the R1 or R2 zone in the future to say, hey, this is something I'd like to do on my property. And of course, taking them through the whole Planning Act process and ensuring that there's public engagement and a forum for their neighbors to come in and comment on that. So I'm happy with what we're proposing. We're not taking away anybody's ability to come forward in the future to say that they'd like to do that on their property, but there would be a full public process in that case. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, so we've had good discussion. We have a mover and seconder. You've heard the motion. Anything further on it? Do I need to read the motion again? No? Okay, all those in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, the motion carries. Thank you. Now, the next item on the agenda is the draft short-term rental licensing bylaw. So it's good that both of these are on the agenda at the same time. So we're able to deal with them hand in hand. So I'll read the motion. Recommended action. Option 1, staff recommendation that this report be received for information and discussion, and that committee of the whole direct staff to proceed with the draft licensing bylaw as presented, as amended, and that staff be directed to report back to committee of the whole on May 11th, 2022, with a final draft version of the licensing bylaw with options for staff resources to administer the bylaw and a proposed fee structure. So, having heard the motion, they have a mover and a seconder to put it on the table. Thank you, Councillor Sanama. and a seconder, Councillor Rose. So the motion is on the floor. I'll turn it over to our planner, and he has some comments to make. Owen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I'd like to just provide a brief overview to committee on the process to date and how far we've come since the referral item was originally brought forward in fall 2021. So as we noted through the last item on the agenda, the existing zoning bylaw does not define or regulate short-term rentals, and the provisions of the Clean Yards bylaw, the noise bylaw, as well as the Ontario Building Code are the primary tools currently utilized by staff to regulate those uses. The proposed new zoning bylaw, however, will define the use and will permit those uses as of right within certain zones in the town. Staff were directed to explore the option of licensing and receive public feedback. There was an open house session on March 1st and March 2nd. We had our public meeting on March 9th. And we also engaged the public through other mechanisms such as public consultation in the newspaper, the project page on Connect Penetanguishene, as well as an online survey. Written comments have been provided as attachment 1 in the report, and as well as an additional comment received by email earlier this week, provided on desk. Attachment number 2 are the results of the public survey, and the draft licensing bylaw is included as attachment number 3. Some of the key provisions within the licensing bylaw include a maximum occupancy of 2 persons per guest room with an occupancy limit no greater than 8 persons. Licenses are renewed yearly and cannot be transferred to new property owners. So if a property transfers ownership, that new owner will have to apply for a new license. A renter's code of conduct is attached as Schedule A to the bylaw, and that will require the owner and the guests to confirm and comply with all of the applicable municipal bylaws, including the noise bylaw. And the licensing bylaw operates on a 3 strikes you're out method, where if 3 more notices to comply or complaints have been received by the town within a 6-month period, the licensing officer may revoke that license. It should be noted, however, that complaints are evaluated on a case-by-case basis, and they would be at the discretion of the officer. To implement the bylaw effectively, we noted that sufficient staffing levels are going to be required to make sure the system is in full working order, as well as maintaining a high level of customer service. So the recommendation before you this evening is to essentially receive feedback from committee with respect to the first draft of the bylaw and come back to committee at a future meeting with the final version of the bylaw, as well as some recommendations with respect to the staffing levels required to administer the bylaw, which in turn will inform, number 1, the implementation. So how fast could we actually implement the bylaw and have it up and running, as well as a proposed fee structure. So once we determine the staffing levels, we can then determine the cost recovery that we're going to be need to be undertaking. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions from committee.
Thank you, Owen. Any questions of Owen on the draft licensing bylaw? Councillor Cummings.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Owen, the fine structure. Have we contacted the OPP regarding their call for service for these types of events? Because I know not one officer ever goes. There's always 4. So, and we are now being charged for a call for service. I just wondered if you had contacted them when we're looking at the fee structure for fines.
Thank you, Councillor. And we have been in contact with them a little bit in terms of the complaints that are received and the process for that, as Some of the complaints do require that we contact OPP, or that the resident, the complainant, actually contact OPP. We haven't had that conversation specifically with respect to fees, but as we discover our staffing needs, that can be included in the analysis in a future report to committee to determine if we need to take that into account, and we'll certainly be in contact with them.
Thank you. The only reason I'm asking is because most of these offenses happen at nighttime when we don't have a bylaw officer on staff. So it's OPP that usually get the call for the bylaw infraction.
Yes, thank you. And again, that's something that we're going to be taking a close look at when we do a detailed breakdown of our staffing requirements. And we're quite aware that a lot of the complaints that come in, they may come in the early morning or quite late at night, where perhaps we don't have staff on hand. So that's something that we'll definitely consider.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Owen. Councillor Levy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. First of all, I'd like to thank all the residents who have reached out to many councillors to help share their experiences on both sides, of course. I've been researching and reading of different municipalities around the province. I've been sharing a lot with the 4 local municipalities and how they're handling this. But I heard an interview today, and I wish I could remember the municipality. I will look it up. It was on CBC Radio early this morning. And the mayor of this particular town that sounded very similar to Penetanguishene, they had brought in their bylaw and licensing law January 1st, 2022. And they are recouping their costs through their licensing fee of $500. Ours might have to be a little more because we don't have as many as them. But they have actually contracted a dispatch company, and it's a 24/7 operation where residents can call a dispatch company, and the response time is guaranteed to be 30 minutes. And it just sounded like an ideal situation. And I will follow up. I will share that information with Owen and the rest of council when I find out what municipality it is. But there absolutely must be someone to contact regarding the Airbnb within 30 minutes. And whether it's the owner or an agent, and the situation must be dealt with. There's also she also brought in the 3 strikes and you're out. If there's 3 verifiable complaints about a property within a 6-month period, their license is revoked. So there's a lot of interesting meat in that particular township that seems to be out front of most of the municipalities in Ontario, and a lot of really valid points. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Owen, you had a comment, and then Councillor Rose.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just wondering about our 8-person limit. Where's the justification for why it's 8, not 6, not 10? How did we come up with 8? Doesn't have to be tonight, just for the next round.
That's a good question. We discussed that at section. I'll let Owen speak to that. And I think Owen had another point he wanted to make.
Yeah, I think I'll respond to that. And if I could, I'll respond to Councillor Levy right after that. So the maximum occupancy of 8 really comes from what was originally proposed in the zoning bylaw. It's been since taken out, so it's only regulated through the licensing. And the reason being is that short-term rentals are permitted within single detached dwellings, and single detached dwellings, on your average single detached dwelling, may have 3 to 4 bedrooms. And so we are simply proposing the higher end of that, so being 4 bedrooms. And it should also be noted that Murphy beds as well as pull-out couches do count as a bedroom under the licensing bylaw, under the definition. of a bedroom. So we would capture those within there, as well as the maximum occupancy is 8. However, it is limited to 2 persons per bedroom. So if you only have 3 bedrooms, then that maximum occupancy then goes down to 6, as it would only be 2 persons per bedroom. And if I can just transition into Councillor Levy's comment, that we are evaluating all of the staffing possibilities with respect to dispatching. We haven't looked into that, but that's certainly something that we can look into a little bit further if desired. And just with respect to your comment from that other township you were looking at that had the 30-minute requirement to have someone essentially on call to respond to that complaint within 30 minutes, that is contained within our draft version of the licensing bylaw. So we need a responsible person that can be readily contacted within 30 minutes of the town receiving a complaint, and they are to take action on that complaint if required within 1 hour. So that is contained within the draft version of our bylaw.
Thank you, Owen. Mayor LaRue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Owen, Councilor LaRue's brought up a point about where did you arrive at number 8? And you mentioned, well, going to the number of bedrooms and that Murphy beds counted as a bedroom. So if you got into a house with 4 bedrooms and the guy puts out 1 or 2 Murphy beds, he's up to 10 and 12 people, according to what your statement is. And that is the issue and a concern that I have, that I brought up before, because I happen to live in an area where I'm not too far from one of these Airbnbs that have been one of the troublesome ones. And I lived there and I'd sit on my veranda, and I saw one weekend where there was up to 14 people in that house and the party was on and so forth. So I still maintain that the number 8, it should be limited, period. No more than 8.
Thank you, Your Worship. And that is how it's written in the licensing bylaw. So the maximum is 8, and it could be fewer than 8 if there weren't enough bedrooms to accommodate 8. But 8 is the absolute maximum as drafted in the bylaw.
Any other questions or comments? Yes, Councillor Clue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This question's for our planner. Owen, I'm curious about the effective date of the bylaw. It looks like it's upon its passing will be effective. I'm wondering if we've given any thought to how we'll be communicating with the owners of the short-term rentals, especially those that have been involved through this process, and perhaps we consider maybe pushing the effective date out 60 or 90 days to give them time to comply? Or am I missing a section about that? Could you clarify? Thanks.
Yep, no problem, Councillor Clue. So we have kind of left that up in the air a little bit right now, as we're not quite sure when exactly the implementation of this bylaw will occur, as it will ultimately be subject to staffing levels. So with our next report, we'll recommend what type of staffing levels will be required to administer the bylaw. And from there, we will be able to determine when the bylaw could be implemented. So I'll just use this as an example. If it's determined that we can operate the bylaw within our existing staffing levels, then we could implement it as soon as the bylaw is passed. However, if we had to increase our staffing levels to oversee this licensing operation, then certainly that would take time. Now, with respect to making sure existing short-term rental owners have enough time to apply for a license, again, that's something that we're still exploring now, and we will come to committee at our next meeting with a proposed timeline, so a window more or less where these existing STR owners are required to obtain a license by a certain date.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? I have a couple. We talked about this at section, and we were at section generally pleased, and I can speak for myself, pleased with the bylaw as it's constructed. I think it takes a lot of best practices from a number of municipalities and puts them together, and I think it's a reasonable bylaw. Our attention turned quickly at section to enforcement, and as someone with a little bit of experience in this area, I understand the importance of enforcement because that is the key in terms of this bylaw. The licensing process is to be defined, and certainly, there's a process for a short-term rental to get licensed. There may be inspections required from the fire department. There may be other inspections required, and then a license is issued. And then there's the enforcement component. We talked about a licensing fee. They range from municipality to municipality. However, when you're talking about a level of service, as the planner has indicated, there's a cost to providing that level of service. And if we're going to provide effective enforcement, we really seriously need to look at what resources we need. I did a quick calculation here at $500 a licensing fee times 78 short-term rentals, which I heard that number, that generates $39,000 in income. So we know in terms of wages, if we're going to hire a municipal law enforcement officer and maybe a licensing officer, whatnot, how much that's going to cover to enforce this bylaw. And then we're talking about 24/7 potentially wanting to have that kind of enforcement. So when we add that conversation in section, we also talked about, is it fair to the taxpayers of Penetanguishene to be paying for this? So should the cost be borne by those that we have to license in terms of the short-term rental owners? If we're introducing this and we have to introduce a regime to enforce the bylaw, who should pay? Should it be the short-term rental operators, or should it be the taxpayers? So those are important questions. I think as a council, we really need to wrestle with that in terms of who's going to pay the cost of this enforcement regime, because as I said, this is very, very critical to the success of this bylaw. We pass a bylaw, we have no enforcement. As Councillor Cummings used to say, the bylaw is not worth the paper it's written on. So we have to look at that. The other thing we talked about at section was there is an accommodation tax that the province introduced a few years ago, and it's up to a maximum of 4% of the proceeds of the business. And basically, it can be applied to accommodation owners to help pay for certain things. And our staff are familiar with this. Councillor Levy, who may be able to speak to it more than me, is familiar with it. But we talked about funding sources. So in addition to licensing, where we can generate funds from the people who are making money on these STRs to help pay for the cost of enforcement. So those were all the discussion at section, and I look forward to the discussion when we have it around this table. I don't know if Councillor Levy has anything to add with respect to the accommodation tax, but that was something that she indicated that she was familiar with. Councillor Levy, and thanks for popping up there.
Yeah, thank you, George. Yeah, the MAT tax has been discussed at EDCNS, and I know Jeff Lees, our CAO, has been involved with the 4 municipalities discussing this. They haven't really moved forward. And I wasn't in favor of it necessarily when we spoke at section, but I'm starting to think it might be an appropriate way to go, simply because the retiree with a small unit under the licensing fee, if we rely strictly on licensing fee, that person with the small unit who's not making a lot of money would be paying equal to the person with 4 or 5 bedrooms. With the MAT tax, it's 4% of the income generated. And I do believe that this is what we discussed at section. The county has a program where they will actually administer the MAT tax and turn the money back over to the municipality while keeping an admin fee. So we have to flesh that out. Owen is aware of this after I raised it. Councillor Vadamokor is aware of this. CAO Jeff Lees is aware of this. So we have to flesh that out before we come back to this table. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further questions or comments? Councillor Cummings?
I think the MAT tax is a fairly good idea. My only difficulty with that is that cash goes a long way. And so you have some people who would take cash and not put it on the books. And so our 4% tax might be very little, and it wouldn't absorb the cost of enforcing this bylaw.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Levy?
Yeah, I appreciate what you're saying, Councillor Cummings, and I'm sure there will be people renting out to friends of friends and relatives, etc. That's not going on the books. But Airbnbs are and VRBOs are really easy to track. We all know where they are. We haul up the map, and if they're registered on the site, they're renting the space out. We can go in and see when it's rented, how much they're getting, how many people are coming, etc. So that's a pretty easy thing to track.
Thank you. Any further comments? So we had a good conversation at section, and we've had a good conversation this evening on this, and staff have a lot to review and digest to come back to us. If there's any other things that we really need to discuss, maybe between now and May, or we wait to May to review these. But it's a complicated subject, and it's something that I think is very, very important. So there's no further comments. I have a mover and a seconder, so I'm going to. The clerk is waving there. Clerk, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a point of clarity for the motion. We did prepare this motion to allow Councillor Committee, my apologies, to provide any comments and direction to the planner in terms of making amendments. And you'll see in there it says as presented / as amended. So just wanted to ensure that the planner has what he needs to proceed, and that council can make that decision that it is as presented or as amended.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. The only comment I would make, Madam Clerk, is there's lots of discussion, and as I said, it's a complicated subject. And in the last paragraph of the motion, it talks about the final draft, and that the word final maybe something we want to take out is maybe it's the next draft of the bylaw, because I think it's going to take some time to work with this one and get it right from council's perspective.
Are you comfortable with then changing the motion to say as amended, just so that it is implying that there will be changes made to the
Councillor Sanama, Councillor Rose, are you fine? Yes, the mover and seconder are fine with those changes. Anything else required, Madam Clerk? Okay, so we've heard the motion as amended, and we're going to take the word final out. So all those in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, the motion carries. Referrals to upcoming agendas and staff. We have 5 referrals. All of them are still active. Anything to add to the referral list? Anything to delete? No. Okay. I'll read the motion that the Planning and Community Development Services section endorse the following additional and existing referrals to upcoming agendas and staff. All those in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, the motion carries. Question period from the media and the public. Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have noted, I'm just double checking now, trying to keep an eye on this. There are several comments in the chat, but this is an opportunity for questions, not comments. The one question in the chat was whether or not the legal non-conforming would be required to pay a licensing, still be required to pay a licensing fee. While this has been somewhat addressed in the chat, I think it's important to keep this within the council procedures. And so I'd like to pass that on as a question and have it answered formally through this process.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I did answer it in the chat, but I'll answer it again verbally for those who are listening. All short-term rentals that obtain a license would be, or sorry, all short-term rentals in the town, whether they are legal non-conforming or whether they are new, would be required to obtain a license should council decide to adopt a licensing bylaw, and as such they would be expected to pay the licensing application fee as well.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Councilor Wedemarker. And now we will move on to 9, this section D, Finance and Corporate Services, and I pass it on to Councilor Sainama.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Section D, Finance and Corporate Services, under our consent agenda. We have the recommended action that the following consent agenda items, having been given due consideration, be received for information. One being the Police Services Board minutes from December 6th, that should be December 6th, 2021, and December 17th, 2022. And then also the 2022 Q1 financial summary report, FIN 2022-08. Could I have a mover and a seconder? Councillor Cummings, Councillor Matt, seconding, thank you. Any discussion, questions? So, seeing none. All those in favor? Thank you very much. I feel like one of those dogs in the back of the car. Anyway, matters for consideration. The 2023 budget timeline report, FIN 2022-09, the recommended action that the 2023 budget timeline be approved as presented. If I could have a mover, please. Councillor Matt, seconder, Deputy Mayor Dubo. Any questions, any discussions? Seeing none. All those in favor? Good. So moved. Thank you. Item number 2, the 2021 capital carry forward request and 2021 draft capital taxation surplus deficit report, FIN 2022-10. The recommended action that the 2021 capital carry forwards totaling $3,514,720 be approved, and that the staff be directed to amend the 2022 capital budget to include the 2021 capital carry forwards. And further, that $17,383 be transferred from the Stormwater Reserve to balance the draft 2021 capital taxation program, resulting in no surplus or deficit for 2021. And finally, that an additional $90,000 in library development charges be included in the library lower development back stairs carry forward project for 2022. If I could have a mover, please. Thank you, Councillor Matt. A seconder, Councillor LaRose. Any discussion, any clarification? Seeing none, I'll call for the vote, please. All those in favor? Very good. Thank you so much. Referrals to upcoming agenda and staff. Referrals that the Finance and Corporate Services section endorse the following additional and existing referrals to upcoming agendas and staff. We've got the OPP policing costs, CNCC recovery, the curling club funding request. Can it be removed or not? Yes. Okay. So yes, that can be removed. And then the community reach funding request, that's still on. So I need a mover and a seconder for without to remove the curling. Well, Councillor Knapp, Councillor LaRose, everyone in favor? So moved. Thank you so much. Any questions from the media or public? Seeing none, I shall refer it back to you, Your Worship. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councillor Steinema. And that does conclude our committee of the whole meeting this evening. I just want to make a point that how pleasant it is to see all your faces, to be in person. And well, I can still see clearly now, and it is nice to get back out and in person. It certainly is. And with that, council staff, we are adjourned. And Madam Clerk, do we need any time before we proceed into the special council meeting? Sarah's nodding. Yes.